Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this special event, which is a kind of Q&A session on the Code of Practice, which of course is an ARL initiative for our industry. The Code of Practice was generated really from our Research and Policy Committee, partly with Tracy as the sponsor of the idea, and we've taken it on because what it does and what it will do is establish a social contract with society and with government about what build to rent is all about. So in very, very simple terms, I see the build to rent, or I see the Code of Practice as the first attempt to really describe the culture of build to rent. And that needs to sit along the investment dynamics and investment case of build to rent. It deals with different issues, but it shows our aspirations and how we intend to deal with the issues that may arise going forward. So that's why it was created. It's out for consultation, as everybody knows, I hope everybody knows, till the end of the year, where we will ask for it to be then formally adopted by the sector. To register any commentary on it, you go onto the website. You have to do it against each principle, and I think we've got over 30 registrations now. We will report back on that feedback in due course. Something will be coming up on that fairly shortly. But the purposes of today's thing is really for me to really answer your questions on the code, its origins, what it's intended to do, why it is the way it is, and just the story so far. Just to remind everybody, the ARL did not create this code on its own, although we were heavily invested in it. The Good Economy created this with us as the independent sort of authorship, and to make sure it had some level of checks and balances. My final point is, because I will refer to this a number of times in today's conversation, it is not the ARL that determines the evolution, or indeed the final version of this code. It is the membership. I am simply your servant in this regard. So I hope that provides a bit of an introduction. And Tracy, who is known to all of you and to come to Workable Compass Rock, is going to, I think, interrogate me. I think that's what we've agreed, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Hi, everybody. Just to add to the background that Brendan gave, and apologies to anybody who's heard this kind of history before, but I was one of the people who was seconded to government back in 2013 to really, the actual words of our mission were to kickstart institutional investment into the private rented sector and to really try and turbocharge what was a very, very nascent build to rent sector. One of the tasks that government set was to create a code of practice, and it kind of got hijacked by civil servants who tried to, well, they wanted it to be broadened out beyond build to rent, and so we ended up with a very, very broad PRS code, which didn't really say anything special other than just obey the law, basically, and quite meaningless in many senses. So it was a missed opportunity to create something special for BTR, to really differentiate itself, talk about the why does it matter if you've got professional management and institutional long-term capital sat behind you. We're now having another crack at that, and it's a real attempt to demonstrate our credentials, to engage with government with something of weight behind us that gives us a seat at the table, that shows that we take our obligations seriously, and we're not, we don't just talk the talk about saying we're different and we're better, that we genuinely sign up to something and deliver a tangibly differentiated service, and have a higher regard for the environment and the industry in which we work. So that's the kind of background. I hope it sort of makes sense, that you understand why we're doing this. We're not trying to come up with a load of rules just to tie people up in knots and make their lives more difficult. There's a genuine purpose behind it all. It would be great to get your views and questions, but maybe if I just start off by firing a question at Brendan, it's going to be the so what question. So we all sign up, Brendan. We're going to work with this code. Fantastic. Some firms will do it really well. Some might just sign a piece of paper and forget about it. What does it all mean? What's the purpose, really?
Well, I think the purpose, I mean, it's going to be different for different companies. And, I think those who look at the code and understand what it's trying to do will use it wisely and use it to good effect. And that is to assist in the conversations that they are having with politicians, with local planning committees, with customers to some extent, and just sort of society at large. So in the 2 years I've been in this job, the one thing that keeps coming back to me is that we do not have a single voice. Nobody knows what we stand for. There's different sources of information. Nobody really understands. I'm confused. So how do we mitigate that? Well, we mitigate that by corralling everybody together as best we can to look at the gap in our communication. So I think from the I said this earlier, from an investment perspective, the understanding of the opportunity investment terms and build to rent, I think now is quite mature. What about the social value piece? How are we articulating it? How are we expressing that? So that's the purpose of the code. It is to balance the proposition depending on the audience. There'll be times when it will be the dominant part of the conversation, and there'll be time when it'll be a minor part of the conversation. What's important is that it is there to be used. Some will approach it as a tick box exercise. That's inevitable. That's up to them. Some will see it as an asset and something that they can use to leverage to advance their business and advance their brand, the presentation of their business. So the so what piece is, it's up to you. The so what is up to you. It's how you choose to use it. So therefore, your input now in how to shape it and form it is critical so that it is a useful thing in the longer term. I see it like a foundation. You've got a solid foundation, you can build lots of walls on it. If you don't, it can lead to problems. So it's a foundational piece.
And I think that that interaction now and getting as many views as possible in the shaping of the code while it's in draft form is a really important element. So how is that going, Brendan? What can we do to increase participation?
So I think if it was up to me, I would say, everybody needs to take the code through their boards and say, are you happy that we sign up to that? I've had informal feedback from some of the bigger players in the industry that they are either in the process of doing that or have completed that, and they will be coming out in support. A few still have one or two questions, or have asked for clarification on one or 2 points, and we'll report on that, not anonymously report on it in due course. So it's, again, what do you want from your industry? You know what I mean? If you want it just to be something which is like, yeah, whatever, fine, we'll have it there and it can be used. But if you're really serious about build to rent, you will look at it and say, what does this mean for my business? And it doesn't, the one thing I will say about the code is that it's a set of principles that have to be applicable to investors and lenders, to operators, to developers, to contractors, to all the advisors, to the supply chain. And that's why it's called the code rather than a charter. A charter tends to be quite technical and has technical specifics about it. So if we look at, if you have the code up there, I don't know if I should put the code up, but you can have a look at it. But if I put the code up, code, the one on responsible, to adopt fair, flexible, responsible terms which promote lasting relationships. Well, that could be a landlord charter. Personally, I think we should just adopt the Manchester one. I think it's pretty good. But that could also deal with how you deal with the supply chain. Are you looking to establish long-term partnerships with your supply chain? Because that's what the ethos of Build to Rent is about. It's not just an external tool, it's an internal tool as well. It cuts both ways. And I'm not sure that aspect of it is fully grasped by many of the membership, that this is not only for outward consumption, it's for inward consumption as well. It's a cultural piece. So how do we get more people to sign up to it? I think please read it. It's supported by technical rationale, some of which is easy, the Good Home Standard, nice and easy to understand that for the design bit. But other bits in there, I've had one comment that the 3-year lease piece is going to cause some problems. We knew it would be. We just put it in to stimulate conversation. Those are the things that we want to refine. What other standards could be adopted, that we may have missed, that are easy to put in, say, if you meet with that, it supports principle 1, 2, and 3, or whatever the case may be. So all that sort of feedback is going to be will be taken in, absorbed, and included in the next iteration.
So aren't we all really good at this already, Brendan? Like, Build to Rent and all of us who work in kind of in institutionally backed living sectors, like we're great. We're different. We're so much better than the high street. Don't we all behave wonderfully already?
Well, I suppose that's the difference between a solo singer and a choir, isn't it? I mean, I mean, you got to hope the choir's singing from the same hymn sheet. So, look, I don't think this is a substitute for individual companies to articulate their own position on ESG or the culture of what they do. That they still need to do. What this is to say, as an industry, please judge us by these criteria, and they have multiple applications, and it'll be different for some than others. I mean, the advisors, for instance, the advisors are not going to be able to adhere to some of them, so they will need to exclude as some of the either the rationale or the principles themselves in order to be fully compliant. And we recognize that. But what we want is a response which is dual. One is to communicate a single narrative for the industry and be part of that single narrative. And then the other one is also then to have your individual companies and businesses positioning made clear, which is for you to do in any event,
Yeah, so it doesn't cut across sort of any differentiated individual service offering or ethos or a particular set of investor requirements. It's very much around, if you want to be in our club, you do need to sort of subscribe to this minimum, almost minimum level of standards. I mean, it's not minimum as in, I like to think there's a slight stretch in them, but having read through them myself and been involved in the formation of them, it doesn't look to me like there's anything particularly onerous or demanding in there. Having said that, I'll let you come back to that in a second, but having said that, based on previous experience, I mean, there will always be people who, as you've said, wholeheartedly go for it and embrace it and live those values and behaviours. And there might be others who quite like having in their pitch documents that they subscribe, but there's scant little evidence of that. I know it's early days, but will this have teeth ultimately?
I think the two priorities that we need to add to this code, I've already mentioned one of them, which is the landlord charter with the Rental Reform Act and all that's going on around rent sector. I mean, I read a piece this week that the NRLA are going to drop landlord, or they're looking to drop landlord from their name because it's such a negative kind of connotations.
It
This
can't become the NRA.
well, they can't. They can't. But I mean, the point is that there's just a degree of toxicity, if that's the correct pronunciation, associated with some words that we need to move on. But so, to my mind, the two priority pieces that I would suggest to the sector is, let's get a landlord charter in place. My suggestion is the Manchester one, or a very close version of that. And then we go to the policing question. How will this be policed? Now, this is a journey. Any organizations who start off with some sort of a code of practice, code of conduct, or discipline, it's a bit of a journey, and we need to start with the first thing is this: these are the codes. Do we agree these are the codes? These are the rationales that support the code. Let's get that established. In terms of moving it on from there, I guess the first year will be a self-certification. Do you, we have to start with something. That's what's deliverable probably in the short term, but I will be established once we get past this consultation piece. And I'm already working with organizations who will come in as an independent, not arbiter, what's the word when you're having a conflict, an independent place to take a dispute if there is one. And there's another word for that, but I can't remember it. And
Mediation?
also, sorry?
Mediation?
Mediation, some sort of independent mediation process. There is the possibility of a rental ombudsman. If that comes through, then obviously we would have to align with that. There's already a housing ombudsman, so we have to look at what entities exist already that may be useful, and make sure we draw them in or have a route to them, and then look at how we will then self-police. Again, I come back to the point I made earlier. If our membership think this should just be a toothless thing, it's a hell of a shame. We spent a lot of time and money getting to it. But if that's what the membership decide this should be, I'm your servant. I would disagree, but I'm still your servant. If that's the majority position. Certainly the feedback that I'm getting is that they want it to have teeth. They want people, they want organizations to recognize the importance of this, and through a process that we will agree with members, get to a point where the teeth agree what the teeth will be and the process to that teeth. Some might be statutory, some will be more internal. And that is a very, very high priority for me to get going with once we get this first next stage established.
Yeah, and I think that will be reassuring to people, that there's proper opportunities for member input now, genuine opportunities. So just if anybody is sitting there thinking, you've pretty much all made up your minds, that's really not the case. Feedback is going to be taken on board very seriously, and we are keen to get as much and as broad a range of that as we possibly can. And the other side of it is knowing that ultimately it will have some rigor about it. And I know from our stance on the Policy and Research Committee, where we are looking and trying really hard to engage with politicians at local and central government level, being able to point to something that's got true meaning and weight behind it will help enormously in raising the profile of our organisation. And it's only by having that clear voice that we'll be able to move our agenda forward. So for me, it's all about enlightened self-interest. We really should be championing this.
No, indeed. I just put the code up there. Did that come through?
Yeah,
I always get a bit confused. It's absolutely the case. I mean, so the advice that we've been, because we've consulted very widely on this, including with the BPF and other government departments, and the advice that we've received is that we need to take it to a point and then distribute it more widely. So one of the questions I think that came in earlier from Ed Grimshaw, who's the chair of our suppliers committee, was, how does this get supported by other government agencies or indeed by the government themselves? Well, the short answer to that is I'm not sure yet, but I do know that there's a journey along, that's in that direction. But there's no point starting that direction until we have a firm position ourselves and firm commitment from the industry that this is indeed what we want to do. So going forward, I would see us, I mean, the BPF, for instance, have already been involved. They've seen, they've been asked to consult on it as well. And we've asked for their help in distributing it within to other government departments, which hasn't started yet, but that's the plan. So we recognize the need for this doesn't just need industry endorsement, it needs government endorsement and broader association endorsement as well. And again, it's going to take a little bit of time, but the very first step is getting this supported by the majority of the industry early in the new year.
That's great. We've got some, a good range of people who've joined the webinar. I just wonder, is there any comments or questions now that anybody would like to raise? This is your opportunity to quiz Brendan and me on kind of next steps, what we're trying to achieve, and also flag any issues that you see.
I mean, whilst we're waiting for any questions to come in, I think it's really important that if I just run through some of these things, is that the way that we worked this up with Vivian King of the Good Economy, and she was a really, really strong influence on getting the structure right, getting the rigor. Being rigorous is always important, but you got to really focus that rigor to an outcome which is deliverable. And she was quite amazing in helping us to get to that. But and the way that it's structured, as you can see now, is that there's two bits. There's a sort of what we agree to do to support the principle and how we might demonstrate that that's what we're doing. And this is the area that I would say I was expecting to have quite a bit of debate about. Maybe that's still to come, as to whether these are acceptable and reasonable and set in high enough of a standard, or they're, oh my goodness, this is just going to become a real problem for me and my business, and how do I manage that? And I don't intend to go through each one unless anybody wants me to, but you start to see how, if for the first one, embed professional standards across all stakeholders, prioritizing safety first and nurturing customer loyalty. So what we're trying to do with each code is have it as a layered thing. So professional standards, we want to be known for our professional standards. That we all know. Prioritizing safety. Well, if you don't, you're going to be in trouble with the Building Safety Act. We're all struggling with that. So we needed that to be a really strong element of us because we're providing homes for people. So that to me became not just a technical point, but a really important cultural point. And then the third one is nurturing customer loyalty. Because I've not seen any codes that aren't consumer codes that talk about nurturing the customer, and trying to really become customer centric or resident centric. And that's also part of our DNA. Every presentation I do on behalf of the industry, I say we are a customer centric sector that really wants to look after our customers for a whole bunch of reasons. One is they're the source of money that we want to make the whole project work. Two, creating happy people is one way, it's an investment in happiness. Happy people give you money and will stay in community and create community, and that's good for business. So, sometimes I flippantly refer to how do you make money out of build to rest? I said, well, you invest in people's happiness. That's how you make money, because that's ultimately what we rely on. The asset value has other dynamics and all that kind of thing, but keeping people happy is really, really important. So if we go through this now, we look at, ensuring you meet standards, ensuring that you're compliant with health and safety. I would say this extends to selective licensing. I was quite shocked to hear this week that in a operational tender, of which number were interviewed, nobody mentioned selective licensing as either an operational cost or as a management issue going forward. That's code one, being aware, making sure you're compliant. When we were up in Birmingham Council pointed out to us, despite me writing some pretty robust letters to them about how we're unhappy with selective license. They said, yeah, well, of all the built to rent cars, very few have actually registered. Most of you are operating rogue. And I went, ooh, okay, I'll be quiet now. So, it cuts both ways. You know what I mean? It cuts both ways. But there's some questions coming through. So shall we deal with those?
Yeah, fantastic. All right, so from Gemma, we represent BTR operators for debt recovery and possession claims. Will the code be intended to extend to us as suppliers, mainly Principle 4, if our clients are a signatory?
Okay, you've asked a very specific question, which I'm probably not qualified to answer specifically. But what I can tell you about what the code is trying to create here is a sense of reasonableness. And reasonableness is generally at least two people need to decide on reasonableness in my experience. So how do we create that? So does the code extend to suppliers? It absolutely does. What does that mean? I'm not sure yet. Do we need a different build to rent lease? That's something that we're working on. I don't know what that will look like, but it's something that our research and policy committee is currently looking at based on modifications to the AST, because we don't want to reinvent the wheel unnecessarily. There is a point here on Principle 4 that talked about support to one of them talked about if somebody was in distress, how we might provide that support, which we put in there because we thought that was how, I can't remember, it might be in a different one. We'll come back to that, but I'm not sure if I'm answering your questions, but it does absolutely include you if that's your question. And to my mind, it's about that fairness and that reasonableness, which has why the Rental Reform Act came through, was because there was a perception, and possibly partly accurate perception, that it's not currently reasonable and fairly balanced between landlord and tenant. In Scotland, they brought through the housing bill. That's not a housing bill for the supply of housing. It's a tenant's right bill, and we called it out as such. Why is there such a reaction? Possibly because it's, there's the time for change, and this is trying to set out that change.
Thank you. And Gemma, if you've got any comeback or comment that you wanted to make on that, just let me know. In the meantime, I'll move on to Tim's question. Thank you, Tim. I think this is another great one. What commitment have we got from the investor level to follow this through? As discussed before, if the money isn't going to enforce live by the code, then the rest of the supply chain will run fast to get off the start line, only to find out the race has been called off. I think that's such a fair point.
Well, this is perhaps one of the areas of the code. So let's start at the beginning of the question. Are the investors and lenders engaged? Yes, they are. Are they taking the code seriously? Yes, they are. I don't know yet if they understand the full import of the code, in that it is not just outward facing, but it is inward facing as well. That we will have to wait and see how that transpires. The questions are gone. I am aware that, particularly amongst the supplier community, that one of their concerns is that our build to rent community, in terms of investors and operators and so on and so forth, are very conscious of the need to report positively on their activity in the marketplace and the quality that they bring to the homes and the customer care, etc., etc. At the moment, there's some frustration that when it comes to contracts, it just goes down to the bottom line, and suppliers go out and get all the badges that matter in terms of whether it be ESG or green credentials, whatever it is. When it comes to the tender, those don't seem to matter. It seems to only come down to pricing. Now, that's the market for you on one level, and that's a glib response that doesn't help anybody. If we're going to build a culture of build to rent that is fair and reasonable to everybody, that includes the relationship between suppliers and who they supply to. And that's an area that's going to need work. I don't think it's going to be solved overnight. I don't think that's going to be the case at all. But are we willing to have the conversation? Yes, we are. Are we willing to raise the issues? Yes, we are. Are we willing to seek some form of resolution or some form of better understanding so that better results can be achieved? Well, yes, we are. Again, I'm going to come back to it. It's not for me. I will promote all that stuff. It's for members, both suppliers and others, to demand that of the industry that they work in, and we will help to facilitate that.
Yeah, I think it does raise a good point around how we treat our own people and how we treat our supply chains, as well as the more outward facing, how we deal with our consumers. But I guess if we don't adhere, or at least promote a minimum standard of kind of being decent employers, then it's very difficult to kind of have any credibility if we start preaching more widely.
I mean, this is the risk, isn't it? This is the risk of this sort of thing, where we say, okay, outwardly government, this is how we're going to operate, and then we're asked to prove it, and that's the sort of data collection. But it's no different to the Building Safety Act, in that sense. It's a whole series of new regimes that we're having to get our heads around and show that we're starting the process of addressing what those objectives are, even if it takes a little bit of time. And I think that that's the most important thing here, is that this is a culture building exercise. Culture takes time. What's important is to start, not to say, oh my goodness, we're not perfect yet, so let's not bother. It's because we're not perfect that we should be bothered, and we must start that journey. And parts of that journey will be quick and parts of that journey will be slow. If we can demonstrate to society at large and government that accepting that we're imperfect, but also demonstrating that we know we're imperfect, and we're starting to work on that, and this is the progress we've made to date, that counts for a lot. It counts for an awful lot, I think, in the way that perceptions develop and are established.
And Brendan, I think it'd be useful just to reiterate what the kind of timeline is again. If anybody here has got comments or they need to go back to their organisation to get some broader feedback, what are the kind of key dates that we need everybody to bear in mind?
Right. So when we published it in, I think, towards the end of Q1, we said we would probably do quarterly updates depending on feedback that we got. Now, we to be honest with you, we've had quite a few registrations on wanting to comment, but not an awful lot of comments yet. We are getting little dibs and drabs coming through, but not an awful lot. So please get your comments in. We have formed a committee to look at this, which will include, I will sort of chair it to an extent, but I don't want to control it and control how it achieves a result. And we'll publish who's on that committee very soon. They are senior people, and we would look for that committee to include representation from all of our membership, if possible. It may not be possible. So if you're able to join the committee, which will really only meet twice this year, one probably now and one towards the end of the year, where we'll review what's come in and look at what changes might need to be made in that regard. So I'm hoping to have the first review panel before the sort of shutdown for a serious summer holiday, so by early July at the latest, and then we'll do one in the autumn as well. And then hopefully by then it'll be sufficient that we'll launch it in the new year, with what I would hope to is a substantial set of members who adopted from the get-go, and we can start to communicate that. I mean, that's the timeline. We've got a new government who've just come, who will be in next week. They have their own little dynamics between now and Christmas time and party conferences and that. Then there's the first 100 days and all that kind of stuff. There'll be a lot of activity in that regard in that space, but I think, you know, if we're ready to engage with them as a sector in the new year with a code that's been ratified by our membership, even though it's not perfect, but it's the start of a journey. I suspect, particularly if it's a Labour government, that will land quite well, at least soften some of the perceptions which are coming forward. We've done it ourselves off our own back without regulation, and we're saying we're open for business, we're open for consultation, we're open to work with you to develop an appropriate response for the whole of the rental economy, but particular build to rent. So, you know, the political events have sort of somewhat overtaken the importance of this code and how it might be used in the short term, you know.
Definitely, and it sounds like, you know, it's a very, very positive step forward, and the timelines, albeit we didn't know the election was going to get called, it still kind of aligns quite neatly.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, so again, we will progress with what we have. You know, the more input we get, the better. I'm happy to, if needs be, I or somebody from the ARL will come to your businesses, to any of the businesses who want a one-on-one to talk through what it might mean and deal with any difficulties that may arise. Very happy to do that. What success looks like to me is that of our 350 members, we have 80% of them signing up from day one. That would be success for me. I'd accept 50% of them, but I'd like to plug for 80% of them, in the knowledge that we will then progress from there to pull in all the other bits and pieces that are needed to make it a really, really industry respected code. So that means the various charters and the policing function and its acceptance within government departments, you know, and other associations at large. So that's really where my ambition lies.
And I really hope that we can well ideally exceed your hopes, Brendan. One of the more striking presentations I recall seeing in recent times was Jo Green, who chairs the Education Committee, at last year's conference. And she called us out. You know, it's quite uncomfortable watching actually, but she called us out as a sector where we kind of tell everybody we have a great narrative about how we're different and better, but actually the data points, particularly around qualifications and training, were not strong, and they didn't back up that narrative at all. So I think part of this process of the code is probably having to take a sometimes uncomfortable look at ourselves and understanding that we've got work to do, and maybe we're not as good as we keep telling everybody else we are. And there's still time to raise our game. We can definitely start to match the external perception we're trying to project.
I mean, I think that's it. Brand build to rent is pretty good at the moment, but it can easily be diminished and damaged. So Joe's green presentation at conference last year was extremely uncomfortable. I think that's more like it, but it's also important to call that out. And I think the ARL as an association is, I like to think when there's awkwardness, that's when we need to get active. We need to intervene, and we just okay, this is something that needs to be spoken about and let's get behind it, because it's not for us to solve. It's for all those involved in build to rent to solve for themselves, but it's for us to say, let's facilitate the solving of this. I mean, we did after the expo, we had that big conversation around the evolution of third-party contracts. What are the tension points or the difficult points in that space? Because the feedback was that there's some frustration there. So the only way I know to deal with problems is to start talking about them, and from there actions will come that will be which can be worked on and deliver meaningful change or meaningful understanding. So we'll be having another one of those evolution of the third-party contract after the conference in November time. But the point here, the principle here, and this is where I see my role in leading the ARL, but the ARL's role really is to say where there is points of pain, we will need to go there and understand what's causing that pain or that frustration or that tension, and try and elevate the conversation around that to address it. Always bearing in mind this takes time, and I think it's as good to say, oh my goodness, I haven't thought about that training of my staff, and admit it and say, right, I'm going to do something about it now. That's probably a bigger success point than saying, oh, 100% of my staff are now trained. Just acknowledging that there's a problem and being seen to solve it. I think that's a culture that really does work, if it can do that.
Yeah, so we have a huge opportunity here.
We do. So I'm just trying to think. I mean, again, you need to go through the code yourself if there's any, particularly if there's any questions that need to come up at it, and no more have come into the chat. I suppose I'm just saying we are open. I'm certainly open to assist in any regard with this, and I'm not quite sure what to add to this other than what we've already said. So if there aren't any more questions, Tracy, I don't know if we
Yeah, I think that's been a really good overview. I think you've conveyed very strongly the genuine desire for true engagement with the members, that this is a straw man effectively, and we want as much feedback and stress testing as possible. Tell us the flaws, tell us the concerns, we can go away and look at them. Tell us what you want, and absolutely that point around kind of walking the walk ourselves internally, and how we deal with our industry partners is as important as what we try and project out there for more consumer government facing conversations. I think we've got that loud and clear too, but please do give us those views, and I'm not sure what else we could usefully add today without more questions from the floor. Maybe we've given everybody plenty to think about.
Well, indeed, and I will just add one more thing to it. It's working already, because anecdotal kind of feedback to me is that some who have used it in conversation, it has landed very, very well, particularly with government and local authorities. So it's in draft form now, and it's already been used to good effect. I think there's a lot that it will do in the future once the industry gets behind it. So yeah, it is proving its worth among some, and I just encourage you all to add it to your armory, as it were, and use it as to convey your intent, because that's what it's there for.
Thank you, Brendan.
Great. Well, I guess just wish you all a great weekend. It's always good to be. It's always good to get to Friday, and we have our SAG meeting, just so everybody knows, is next week for the strategic advisory group, where we could also pick up any questions. So that's on the 3rd, Wednesday the 3rd. So if there are anything, you can push it through your committee chairs, and we'll get to the SAG that way. If you don't want to put anything on the on the website, all right to me. So have a good weekend, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Cheers out. Bye-bye.